At what age can your child be expected to have the impulse control to stop themselves from hitting? My name's Jodie Thornton, and I want to talk about this because it's something that comes up when we're talking a lot about gentle parenting approaches to hitting. One of the things that we talk about is how they don't have the impulse control, right? So you can't expect them not to hit. And while that's true, I do want to talk about the solution that isn't impulse control that will also help them to not want to hit, or to be able to not hit, I should say. So the very first thing is, what age do they develop impulse control? Now, I had a look at various sources about what age this really happens, and for the most part, people were referring to between the ages of about 3.5 and 6. Now, having said that, there were wider variations. I even found a source that said that it's not really reliable until they're 10 years of age. And there's lots of different, research and methodologies. And so I think that when we look at the range, it's a really, really wide range. And I think that it also depends a lot on your child's personality, and also the situation that you're in. So I think that there's a lot of factors that contribute to it. And I think that, obviously that answer being such a wide range is not actually that helpful, right? So I guess the first question is, does your child have impulse control or do they not? And if they don't, then they don't. And if they're not controlling their impulses, chances are they probably don't have the ability to control their impulses. Now, just as a side note, I'm 43. I still sometimes eat too much, and I still sometimes snap at people, and I still sometimes do things that my rational brain is not okay with. And I just want to normalize this idea that impulse control is really ever really done, and also that it's the be all and end all, right? I want to really focus on how by focusing on the fact that our children don't have impulse control, what we take that to mean is that we should just be patient and allow the hitting to stop when it stops, or just keep going with it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to hit. And ultimately, these things are getting in the way of an alternative path. Controlling the impulse is not the only option that your child has in order to avoid hitting or lashing out physically when they're upset. So if we think about what does impulse control really mean, what we're looking for here is a recognition that impulse control means that you can be comfortable with an unsolved problem. So you have a need that is not getting met, or you are dysregulated, and you need to be able to be comfortable enough with that situation that you don't have to act. So when the impulse comes up, you have the ability to stop it. And again, coming back to that, the impulse control around, having a little bit too much to eat, still not there at 43. And I know that many functioning adults do have the ability to control that impulse, but not for me. And I'm sure, most adults I speak to, there are impulses that we have that we don't control, right? So rather than focusing on that, we want to really focus on what, and actually, let me just talk a little bit more about that. Being comfortable with a problem being unresolved has to be emotional repression. The only way it's not emotional repression is if you have an impulse come up, you manage to control it long enough for you to solve the problem. And so if we're not actually solving the root cause of the impulse, then the only thing we're doing is emotional repression. It could be deep emotional repression where we're saying, you can't have those feelings, or we might be saying it's okay to have those feelings, it's just not okay to act on them. Well, that's a softer and gentler approach, but it's still emotional repression because we're saying you can have the feeling, but you're not going to do anything about it. Right? And when we really look at what a feeling is doing, it's telling us about our needs. So it's either telling us that our needs are getting met or our needs are not getting met. Now, if we have a focus on what are the two reasons that a child would hit, the first one is that they are emotionally dysregulated. And so because of their own, and there could I don't really know whether you define physical dysregulation as different to emotional dysregulation, but you can be physically exhausted, you can be overtired, you can be thirsty or hungry. And so if we think about those, one of the reasons that your nervous system is just out of control and you're not trying to achieve anything by your hitting, you're just lashing out. And so in that case, I actually don't really want your child to have the ability to control that impulse. What I want is for your child to recognize that their emotions are getting out of control and take steps to resolve that dysregulation. Now, obviously, the younger your child is, the more they'll need your support in recognizing their emotions and definitely on having solutions to that dysregulation. Definitely they're going to need support, but you'll be surprised how well kids can actually do at really young ages if we support their skill development. Now, the second reason a child will hit is if they've decided that my need is not being met, and either the best way to get my need met or the only way to get my need met is to hit. Right? And that is much more like, yes, they're more likely to do it if they are in a state of dysregulation. So if we imagine they're not quite as dysregulated, that they're just reacting, but if they have less emotional capacity in the tank, they are more likely to lash out. Then the more regulated they are, the less likely they are. But if this is actually, it might be reactive, but it's a strategy to get the need met. Again, I don't really want your child to get in the habit of saying, it's okay that I don't get my needs met. And that might be a shocking thing to say, because quite a lot of not just our parenting, but just our culture in general, quite a lot of it is about you should be okay with your needs not getting met. And that's not actually how I think we should be running our lives. What we should be focused on is, how do I get my needs met in a way that works for everybody else? So all the people, and then also the environment, right? So and the animals as well. So how do we get our needs met in a way that's workable for everybody else? That's what we want to be focusing on. We don't want to be focusing on, how do I build up the capacity to be fine with my needs not being met? So for a very small child, what we're looking at here is the emotional awareness to see that your feelings are coming up. So we know it's always easier for children and adults to notice a change in sensation in their body than it is to notice a change in their emotions. So we want to really build up their attunement with their own bodies. Then secondly, we want to build up your child's ability to express what they need with their words. And so really recognizing that it's not just about the thing that they want. So it's not just about the Lego or the pink cup or the favorite shirt. Like, there's a deeper need underneath the strategy that they're trying to get. And so building up your child's ability to talk about that really helps in finding a solution before the impulse to hit comes up. And then the third skill that we really need is problem solving. So for really little children, and I was going to say just really little children, but it's actually any kid that's really struggling. So we see this in older kids, and also we see it a lot in adults, where they haven't got a foundation of problem solving as a team. And so they find it very difficult to stay in a conversation about, how do we solve this problem without becoming reactive, right? And so no matter whether your child is young, an older child, or even an adult child, if your child hasn't built up the just the trust in the process that you can talk to somebody about, how do we get both of our needs met at the same time, if they haven't built that up, it's going to take some time, right? They have to see it working more and more before they can trust that it's that I don't have to get dysregulated because I'm being asked to be flexible about how I get my needs met so that it's okay for everybody else, right? And then finally, we want to build up the skill to actually come up with the creative solutions. Now, for most children, They're so much more creative than we are because they don't have decades of, like, in our culture we reward like efficiency. And when I say efficiency in inverted commas, it's because it's not necessarily efficiency. It's like, solve the problem, don't stay in the problem, right? And so when we think about that, we get rewarded for just doing the thing that works and then repressing our needs that are getting in the way, right? And so we have decades of conditioning that this is the best way to do it. We just do it this way. So it's much harder for us to be flexible. And then on top of that, we just have much more fixed neurology. So definitely our brains are still plastic, even into old age. But a child's brain is so much more flexible in how it thinks. So generally speaking, your kids don't need to be taught how to be more creative. They do need to be taught or given practice, opportunities to practice, coming up with solutions that work for two people or more, depending on the situation. Now, your child is very capable of doing this at a very young age, but obviously the younger your child is, the more you're going to take the lead in finding the solutions. The older your child gets, the more they can take the lead in finding the solutions. So these are the skills that actually, if we have a situation where if your child is becoming dysregulated, we figure out how to help them get regulated, then we don't need to wait for impulse control for them to stop hitting. If your child has a need that's unmet and we help them to recognize the feeling coming up, to talk about what they need, to find a solution that works for everybody, again, the impulse to hit doesn't come. So they don't have to control the impulse to hit because they're on this track of let's solve problems together. Now, this may feel unrealistic, particularly if you've got a child who's very explosive or a child who has a very short fuse. It may feel like this is all great in theory, but it's not going to work in practice. It definitely takes some practice to build the skills up, and it definitely takes an approach that really breaks down for each step. Is it working? Is it not? And if it's not working, what do we do instead? Now, that's all the detail that I'm going through in my webinar called Help Your Child Stop Hitting. And you can grab that at jodithornton.com/hitting. And in that webinar, I go through, okay, so what are we going to do to preventatively regulate them so that we can make sure that we're giving them the best chance of being able to problem solve because their systems are starting from a baseline of better regulation. We're also going to talk about what do we do in the moment. So how do we build up your child's ability to recognize their emotions in their body? How do we help them to build that skill to speak up for what they need and finding solutions that work for everybody? I'm going to go through the step by step. Now, of course, because hitting can be such a dysregulated process, and also we don't always have a lot of time to be able to respond in the moment in a fulsome way, particularly when we're learning a new strategy. So I'm also going to be talking about how to handle a situation after it's over in a way that builds the neural connections for your child and for you to make it easier for that to be the default response in the future. So for your child, it's easier for them to have the default behavior of problem solving. And for you as the parent, how do we build your neural connections so that the process of identifying what's the root cause of this issue and how do we resolve it before the impulse to hit comes up? How do we build those connections for you so that that's just your default behavior? You don't have to remember it. It doesn't have to be the right day. You don't have to check your instructions on the fridge. You actually that's your default behavior every time your child you can tell they're on the way to hitting because they're getting dysregulated. So hopefully that will be really, really helpful for you. And if you have any questions at all, please do reach out. I'd love to hear from you. And also, I'd love to see you at the webinar.